The title of the webinar is Hearing Young Children on Topics of Global Importance. And I think that especially during the pandemic time, we have many people, not only us, many people have talked a lot about children, about the consequences of the pandemic on them, the impact of the lockdown, the impact of online schooling, and many consequences on their health, on their behavior. But I think that as quite often happens, we did not allow children to have their own voice. And this quite often happens to those who are considered more vulnerable or who have less power to exhibit or to share. So I think that this is really a great opportunity for us to talk about this experience regarding giving voice to young children. But I think that it's even more important the fact that children in this way are really seen as a significant stakeholder in the community, and which is something that we need to recognize, and it's important also for community development. So as I said, also when I invited May Lene Karlsen, who is the speaker for this afternoon, and Stefania Maggi, who will be the discussant, when I invited them, I told, you know, I understand that maybe community psychologist doesn't really engage often with children. We usually maybe work with the older generation. But I think that in terms of rights, of social justice, of empowering people, it would be also important to consider children perspective. And with the SCPA board, when we discovered this initiative of May Lene, we thought that this would be really a chance for us to engage into a conversation on children, and on children in the perspective of community psychology. So I'm not going to take a lot of time more. I want just to thank May Lene Karlsen for her willingness to be with us, and also Stefania Maggi. They both work in a very passionate way with children and with the community to sustain, support children's rights and children well-being. May Lene Karlsen is a counseling and community psychologist. She has a PhD in counseling psychology. She had it at the University of Surrey in 2010. And she has a particular interest in primary and pre-primary school age children. And it's really interesting that she's connecting clinical and community psychology work, because it's something that is relevant, especially in challenging periods like the one that we are managing at the moment. Stefania Maggi will be the discussant. She is not based in Europe. She is working at Carleton University. First of all, she's a friend of mine. We have been working together in order to promote children well-being with a project that involved Italy, in particular Emilia-Romagna region, and Canada. The project name was Kids in Places Initiative. And probably we discovered with that experience that despite, let's say, our different background, we had a very common and shared perspective on how to work with communities, on how to work in order to support children's rights and well-being. And so this was the reason why I thought, as I said, I know that she's engaged with these topics. She's a very passionate scholar, and I said probably she would be the right person to engage into a conversation with May Lene Karlsen, because they both work with children and they can really also connect the perspective of community psychology with other disciplines. That is something that we always, let's say, think it's important, but sometimes we forgot to do. So I think that really I'm happy to be here, and I think that we will have a really interesting afternoon all together. So now I give the floor to Stefania, and then she will introduce May Lene in a more organized way than I did. Thank you.
Thank you, Cinzia, very much, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm joining you from rural Quebec in Canada. I have satellite internet, so I apologize if sometimes my audio goes a bit laggy. Anyhow, it's such a pleasure to receive an invitation to be part of this event. Cinzia, like she mentioned, we are all old colleagues and friends, and this gave us a chance to catch up a bit. But also, I was super excited to have a chance to interact with Dr. Karlsen, May Lene. We call each other Stefania and May Lene, and Cinzia is totally fine. And because the work that May Lene is doing is really critical. And I can't wait for her to tell us a lot more about it. I have some questions that I hope I'll have a chance to ask. But before I do that, I would like just to say a couple of words about May Lene. Besides the fact that her background is in counseling and community psychology, she's also a committee member of the community psychology section of community psychology in the British Psychological Society. And she describes herself as passionate about hearing children. And I want to know, just to give her a chance to introduce herself, is what does it mean to be passionate about hearing children? And how did you become passionate about it? Why is it so important to you? And I'm sure that that will lead us into also giving the motivation, I'm sure, is the foundation that led you to create this project, which I think the title is Project Children Heard. And it's thematic. You've done a section on COVID, and there's a new one that you just launched on racism. So I would just start with that question for you. What does it mean that you are passionate about hearing children?
Well, what a great question to be asked at the beginning of anything. I should say hi, everybody. It's very nice to see people. I'm imagining we have similar interests, which is so exciting to me to be meeting other people who have an interest in hearing young children. So I hope I'll get to hear a bit from you as we go along. So yes, what does it mean to be passionate about hearing young children? I find it strange myself because it's not really a thing. I don't know what that actually means, but I know I'm passionate about it because I was asked to do a Petra Kucha session. I don't know if you've heard of that format. It's so you have like 6 minutes and 20 slides to share something that you're passionate about. It's kind of it was a thing a few years back. And I was asked to do something on something I was passionate about. And I was pondering for days, what is this one thing that I can show in such a short time and so sort of specific? And I ended up with hearing children. And I was very surprised about that. But when I look back, I can see that is sort of a red thread in things I've done. I mean, it's in my thesis, my doctoral thesis, I wrote about hearing children on spiritual matters, and that was children aged 6 and 7. And as a child myself, I had lots to say and wanted to be heard on things of global importance. And now working with children in clinical settings, I'm not doing that right now, but when I did, it was hearing children, and that was the most important part of my job, was really to facilitate that people around children, families, school, was hearing children, hearing what they had to say and what was important to them. So yes, that's I'm a little bit interested myself to see how this evolves, this passion of mine. Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah, and when I think about hearing children, I cannot stop thinking about who's listening, right? Because if children are talking and they're speaking, then who is there to listen to them, and what is done with what the children have shared? So that's something I'm really interested in, and I'm curious to know how you have integrated that into your project, because if I understand it correctly, there is a parent element that is very critical in the work that you're trying to do. So how about you? I let you talk about your project and decide the pace. I just want to say that questions are welcome as May Lene does her presentation. I myself might have some questions that I ask, but for everyone, please feel free to intervene. I think we all agree that we'd rather have a conversational format rather than an conventional academic presentation. So that's the tone. And so that's it. May Lene, the floor is yours. Let me know if at any point you'd like to take a pause, or if it's time for questions.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you very much. Yes, so I have prepared something, but I haven't got sort of an aim. There's no aim for me in finishing that. I'd much rather, like you said, have a conversation around it and just let's see how it evolves. I wondered if it's possible to begin with to get just a sense of the people that are joining us. I would love if we could use the chat and just hear from everybody where they're joining us from, what country they're joining us from. Would you mind just sharing that in the chat? So I'm joining you from Norway, I should be saying, although I have connections with the UK, and I'm part of the section for community psychology in the UK. I actually live and work in Norway.
So we have Norway, Canada, and Italy.
And Albania. Someone wrote in the chat. Please,
Oh,
the other participants.
How do I not see it?
Yeah, I can't see it either. Nothing is coming up.
Okay. It is because it was a previous, but now I think that you should be able to see it. Or maybe not that one because it was sent earlier, but maybe if the other people are share their. Okay, Vasco is from Portugal.
My name is wrong. I'm Gabriela, but I can't. I don't know how to change it. Doesn't appear the option to change the name, so it's my brother's name.
Okay.
Slovakia, Portugal, then we have Norway, Canada, and Italy. And if there's any other, I'm sure it will show up soon. That's nice. That's from quite a few countries. That's lovely. I wanted to, you could also just chat. You don't, as in talk, you don't have to write in the chat if you prefer, but I wanted to say that to begin with, since we're taping this. I don't know if everyone's comfortable talking. but feel free also to just say it out loud. And then I was wondering if I could hear just one word or two about what role you're bringing into this webinar, whether it is a role as a teacher or psychologist or parent or just somebody, a student or someone who's interested in children. It would be interesting to hear what role you bring into this. You could either say it or write it.
I can say it. I'm a psychologist and I'm working in a school. It's my first year working, so it's been quite an experience. And I'm working for an organization, Teach for Portugal. There are a lot of teachers in the Europe, Teach for England, Teach First, that is in England. And I'm from Teach for Portugal, and I'm working in a school at the moment. And it's really a special topic because I really want to make the students be heard, and sometimes it's difficult for them to be heard in the school. It's not easy.
Interesting. Thank you.
I'm me. I am a lecturer of psychology at the University of Shkodër, Luigi Krakući in Albania, and now recently 3 years. And I wanted to know more about this topic and this approach with the children during this period, and to share with the students this information, these experiences.
Good. Thank you. It's great to have you here. And then I work. Yeah.
Sorry, but I have a very similar motivation because I'm also a lecturer and a researcher at the university, and I want to learn how to hear children and how to do it. So I'm very interested.
Good. Very good. Interesting. And then we have Isabelle saying, I work with restorative practices in schools. So there's some similarities between everyone who's joined us. That's good. I'll keep that in mind. I mean, we have, I haven't worked that much in schools, but I think working with children inevitably entails their life in school. So we will touch on that, and it'll be interesting just to exchange ideas, I guess, from our different professions and disciplines. Good. So let me share my screen, hoping everything will work out without any problems there. How is that, Stefania? Could you see?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah, we see the screen.
Good. Right. So I have got sort of 4 clusters of topics that I wanted to touch on, but we can see how long we spend on each. I prefer to call them clusters of themes rather than an overview, actually, or an agenda. We can go in and out of them and see what's most relevant here and now. I wanted to say something about Children Heard, which is the project that we developed that we initiated during the pandemic, building up sort of an argument for why listening to children, because listening to children needs in this day and age some form of legitimizing. Not everyone agrees that it's worthwhile or important, and so every time we talk about hearing children, we also need to legitimize doing that. And then I have some ideas for a conceptual framework thinking about it, and then innovative methods for hearing children. So that's kind of the topics I'll be touching on, and then we'll see how it goes. So I wanted to start by introducing this drawing, which was made by me when I was 9-ish years old. I was born in 79, so I grew up in the 80s, and this illustrates something of the world that I had, that I saw myself living in, the world that I constructed for myself. And I don't have a very vivid memory of drawing it, but I know at the end of that drawing, I was very pleased, which is why it was kept in my attic until just a few months ago when we were clearing it out, and I found it. I thought it was very interesting. It features some sort of very big topics in there. We have the growing desert, we have the toxic waste, we have the growing cities. I grew up in a small town in Norway, so this was not part of my environment at all. There were the starving masses. That was sort of a picture from the 80s through the media, and also my parents would sometimes remind me of how lucky I was and compare me to these images of people starving. And there was the dwindling ozone layer, and all of these images and me in this world communicate something about how I saw myself in relation to it. And I know that I've wanted opportunities to explore this and to have agency within that. I think do something about it, because I was painfully aware of the inequalities and the suffering really, and the challenges we're faced. So I think this picture shares a little bit about who I am, a little bit about my motivations, perhaps a little bit about who I was, and something about the opportunities that I wish to create for children now. I know there are many more of those opportunities now than there were back then, but still it's definitely something that is being overlooked very often. So to come back to the now, this is my friend and colleague, Dr. Gail. She wasn't able to join us today, but she will be joining us or be present very much in the presentation, because we did all of this together. We created Children Heard, which was an idea that came up when the pandemic hit, the schools closed down, the nurseries shut down. And we just thought, oh no, we're not going to hear from children now. We're not going to have the opportunity to hear from them. What is going on? And this is all going to be over in 3 weeks. And it's going to be too late, because young children won't be able to reflect way back on what was going on for them during the pandemic. We didn't realize, of course, that it was going to last for over a year at the time. But we felt this urgency that, wow, while this big event is happening, we need to really gather children's views and hear what they have to say. And we also realized that very quickly children's views or hearing children could be lost in the urgency to protect them and to inform them. So there was a lot of resources out there in how to inform children. And we thought, oh, I hope that there will be a focus on hearing them as well. So we took matters in our own hands. We started a project, devised an activity that parents were to do with their children in the shape of an interview, where children were the experts and parents were good at listening and asking questions. And this turned into survey. And with 16 questions, only 2 are sort of qualitative. The remaining 14 are qualitative. So 2 are quantitative and the rest are qualitative. Very open-ended questions, very much about exploring between parent and child what was going on for the child. And one was a picture that they could take of a creative work they'd done and send to us. And in promoting this survey, we partnered up with 3 UNICEF offices in Norway, Slovenia, and Iceland. And this was done simply by contacting them first and asking if they'd be happy to promote it, and then starting a conversation, a dialogue about what we were trying to do, and agreeing on that agenda or the aim for that survey, and then ending up partnering with them, which was just amazing. And through them, we reached over 500 children across Europe. And in analyzing that amount of qualitative data, we partnered up with the Children Research Center of the Open University in the UK, and we launched a report earlier this year titled "Coronavirus and My Life: What Children Say," and I'd recommend you having a look at that. It's available on our website and also on Children's Research Center websites. There were 2 reports. One was made for adults and one was made for children. So the report on the left-hand side is for policymakers and decision makers and practitioners and professionals and parents to some extent. And the one on the right is for children, which is shaped as a poster on our website. It's an interactive poster where you click onto a room and you will go into a theme with quotes from children that relates to that theme. So that's kind of the background. This report and the work that we did with children on their experiences of the pandemic provides the backdrop for this webinar, and is the reason why we were asked to have a webinar. Although these are some of the findings that you can access in the report. And we also obviously have that online gallery with all those amazing pictures, which amounts to nearly 200 pictures now from children around the world. But I won't really be focusing so much on what the children told us. I'm more interested in the process of hearing children, in the methods of hearing children, and in the attitudes that might help us or stop us from hearing children. So that is what I'm going to go on to be talking more about. And to that end, it's important to recognize the irony of us talking about hearing children and then not having any children here to hear, and this dynamic that we often create, obviously having spaces that are not accessible to children and talking about them. And so just to mention that this is happening, that we could question whether it needs to happen as often as it does happen. Is it possible to create spaces where we talk with children about children? What are the obstacles to that? There's no easy answer to it or solution perhaps, but I think it warrants a question every time we do that and every time we gather together to talk about children, and to what extent we can address the disempowered position we put children in. Because obviously, just imagine we did the same, say a group of men sitting talking about women and their experiences in a room that was inaccessible to women. It would put women at a very disempowered position for several reasons. And one of them also being the danger of us generalizing children's experience, talking about children as if they were one homogeneous group. And this is often what happens in media. For instance, we tend to bring up one image of children, such as during the pandemic, the image of children as vulnerable has been very strong, very dominant, very present, and for good reason as well. That side of children or quality of children is important during the pandemic to be reflecting on and working with, but also I think it is important that doesn't disempower children, and that we don't neglect the full and rich and diverse experience that children are having of the pandemic, some of which are very much a more empowered position. Children that are actively fighting against the coronavirus are engaging with it in so many ways. So that's something to be mindful of here with us as well, to use words such as children and childhood cautiously. And it's okay to be critical of that and ask critical questions when we do. Yeah. So let's go on.
Yeah. If I can pause for a moment on what you just said, I think it's fundamental. Creating the stage for young people, not only to speak, but also to see the impact that their words have on the world around them. And we're lucky in Canada to have a tremendous advocate for children's rights who established the research center within my institution. The center is called London Pearson Center for the Study of Childhood and Children's Rights. London Pearson was a senator who was nicknamed the children's senator. She worked for 10 years in the Senate to advance the rights of the child. And a lot of the work that she has done is to establish activities and opportunities for children to contribute to political discourses. And so every year she organizes these events called Shaking the Movers. And every year, young people of different ages come together. They formulate questions for politicians and decision makers. And as the academics are sharing those questions with the politicians, And then we bring back responses to the young people. And so this is all digitized. You can find all the reports for the last 10, 12 years of these meetings all across Canada. It's a very interesting format that I think could be interesting if people are looking for examples of how we could create those opportunities for the voices of children to actually be heard and have an impact outside of research projects or outside of the many efforts that a lot of people like us are doing around the world, but they tend to be kind of in silos and individual efforts. So I thought to bring that to the attention of the audience because they might find it interesting to go and look what it is. I'm going to put the link on the center to in the chat in a moment.
Yeah, that would be great. I think that's so good. We really need examples of how this works in practice, because so much is conceptual, ideological, and then putting it into practice means getting a bit more specific about how to actually get things done. And that's when we can meet some very, some barriers, both in terms of attitudes, but also very physical barriers to engaging with children and asking them. And I think maybe we can get onto that now, actually, just to talk about these possible barriers that we're meeting. This idea that because I have had talks earlier about hearing children, and towards the end of having had this, talked about what children have said and examples of good practice, and then at the very end have some person raise their hand and say, but how do you know what they're saying isn't just what their parents told them? And the whole talk is just going into pieces because I didn't realize that actually people were left with these questions that why do we even talk to children? What is the point in asking them questions? Are we sure that we can really trust what they have to say? It's basically the question that many are asking themselves. And I think some questions include whether they're developmentally able to form their own views. It could be, will they just repeat what others have told them, or will they say what they want, what they think you want to hear? And there's a big element of trust from adults to children, adults trusting that children can be engaged with. Will their truth be true tomorrow? Will they tell the truth, whatever that truth is? And I think this element of trust is actually really, really important when engaging with children, whether that is in a classroom setting or in a research setting or a clinical setting, because we could put this the other way around. I think children could be asking exactly the same questions. Can we be trusted? Do we want them well? Even some of these questions I think sound interesting when put on the other side, but the children will say, are we just saying what we think they want to hear? Are we developmentally able to form our own views? We could really ask that of adults. Are we, because children really do have their own views. Maybe the question is whether adults have their own views, whether we will talk from our own genuine experience and not just repeat what others have told us. So when we are looking for the truth, that isn't just a repetition of what we've been taught, I don't think adults are any more reliable sources than children. It's just slightly different, the way that we might communicate those. And so initially in any encounter with children, in wanting to hear them, there is this element of trust that needs to be established, both for the child, just, do you want me well? Who are you? They will be free or not free to share their experience depending on how much they trust the context and the person asking. And there's all these questions from the adults about children's trustworthiness. I think this is a bigger issue in our society of not trusting our children. There are many narratives going about how children will, press your buttons. If they know where to press, they will. If they have this, there's this idea that they will manipulate, or that they're doing things to get attention, rather than to think of it as doing it for contact or for a sense of belonging or some sense of soothing. And so this idea of trust is really fundamental, I think, to address first of all.
May, sorry, but I mean, when you were talking about this, I was really thinking, but do we have, I mean, I think that we do have the same challenges also when we work with, I don't know, with adolescents or with adults, because in a way, when you are entering in the field and you are doing research, well, you are considered an external agent in most cases. So in this sense, I mean, you have to build a trustful relationship with them, with the people you want to engage into a conversation with. But at the same time, I think, I mean, this would be the same with an adult, because probably he or she may have some, I don't know, expectation about what we want to know, what we expect them to know. And sometimes adults could even have more stronger barriers, because they are maybe more worried about, I don't know, the social reputation, about, I don't know, interests related to what they need to have, the support that they may have from other people. So, well, I think this is a really interesting point, because I think that it questions more the relationship that the researcher has with the people he or she wants to know about. And I think it's not really an issue of children, because I think that those questions, those issues are probably relevant for in many other situations where we engage with communities that we are not part of and that we have to struggle to find ways to engage with.
Can I just say, May Lene, if you don't mind, I like to try and address that. From my point of view, this, you're totally right. I mean, these kind of assumptions are at the foundation of any research project where you go as an outsider. You need to establish the trust, especially when it comes to qualitative research. But the way I see it is that these thoughts are barriers to even want to talk to young children. While with adults, we try and overcome them because we are very adultocentric. We think adults are superior in their ability to contribute, to communicate and all that to younger children, for example. While what May Lene has pointed out is the capacity to communicate is there. The way in which they communicate might be different from the way we do as adults, right? But typically a researcher, it's uncommon for a researcher to want to step out of that adult expectations of how to communicate and speak the language of the children. So I think there are barriers to even ask the questions and get out and interact with young people, more so than unique challenges while working with children. Because I agree with you, they're the same. I see the same. Trust is at the foundation of a lot of our dynamics. Sorry, May Lene,
yes,
I just felt.
No, great. That is just how it should be. That we're on anybody else as well might have ideas on this. I think that is so true, that this is one of the reasons why, might be one of the reasons why people wouldn't even think to ask children what they think about global issues, and let alone asking about what they think about what's happening to their lives just now. Very intimate things are happening that people don't sometimes forget to ask children, thinking that they might not have a view of their own. They're developmentally not there yet to be able to express that view. So that is a hindrance. And I think in addition, there's this power dynamic between adults and children, which makes the idea of trust perhaps extra important in working with children and in interviewing children, because parents and researchers and teachers will already come in with such a authority and will have defined the setting and will have defined the questions and will have defined everything around hearing children. And so the trust needs to be built, I think, in a slightly different way than with adults, possibly. I mean, for instance, school councils is an example of that, where children are in a setting, a school setting, where they are rewarded for having the right answer to questions in the school classroom. And there is a whole socialization in school where there is such a thing as a good student, as right answers. And so the school council, when participating on issues, this same dynamic, the same expectations could also be influencing whether children will talk genuinely from how they experience things, or whether they will talk from what they think you want to hear, having already been in that classroom with that way of thinking. It might need to be addressed, the trusting that children are allowed here to say things that might not be the right thing, or that in this room you can talk from your experience rather than from what is the right answer. And that dynamic between adult and child can become the dominant one in any setting, that children think that, oh, because the adult's asking a question, it means they want me to answer the right thing, or there is the right answer here, and they might be searching for that, unless an element of trust or a relationship of trust is being built. I think it is a good question to be asking. How do we make sure that the child feels that it's okay here to share from my own perspective and my own view, rather than trying to get at the right answer?
Can I ask, or just maybe ask what you think about, trust is one element, but what about the feeling of being safe? Feeling safe.
Yes, 100%. That is trust for children to a great extent. A feeling that the adult in this setting wants you to be well, wants you have good intentions for you, that you're not in danger of in any kind, whether it's physical or emotional. Yeah, absolutely. I would say that. And I just wanted to say, obviously, children have things to share. I mean, we only need to ask children, and there are lots and lots of research out there sharing things that children have said about their own lives, about the world that they construct and live in. And our website is full of things that children have shared. There's a sharing space, there are poems by children, there are pictures, and then there's the research as well. And I'd recommend having a look at that. It's just so inspirational to hear from children. And then we come to the next point, which is, can children express themselves, which we've already talked about. I think children can feel very foreign to people because children and adults live in such separate worlds. It might be difficult sometimes to understand or access the communications that children have, and it takes a bit of an effort to try and build that bridge. I kind of look at it in a similar way to the social model of disability. It was such a revelation for me when I realized that it wasn't the disability that was the obstacle, but the things that the society put in the way of disabled people that made them disabled, that were the obstacle. It was the staircase and the way that we communicated, and all of these things that were that made a person disabled. And I'm wondering whether we can think in the same way about children, that it's not necessarily that children express themselves in ways that are inaccessible to us. It might just be that we have defined communication in such narrow terms that it becomes exclusive to children. It excludes children just by the way that we understand and use communication, and whether the task is for our view and understanding of communication and how we engage with other ways of communicating, other ways than verbal written communication, for instance, which is so dominant. Does this make sense? And does this have relevance to people? Okay.
Yeah, I find that, again, this is a barrier. When we rely too much on verbal communication, we become, how can I say, we marginalize a lot of groups that we could communicate with. So even like in other settings, not necessarily working with children, but say working with newcomers to a country who might not know the language. And oftentimes, I mean, you all know very well that the published literature in most social sciences relies on convenient samples of white middle class individuals. Things have been improving in the last decade, I would say, for more inclusive research. But fundamentally, it's because we rely way too much on the spoken and written ways of communicating, like you were pointing out. And I imagine when you're working with children, especially the young ones, like the preschoolers, it really forces us to fine-tune our senses, all our senses, and forget about language as the primary means of communication. It's like we're as adults, as humans in general, over time and history, we have become less and less reliant on our capacity to experience the world through multiple senses. We only use a very narrow set of skills, and that is really is marginalizing a lot of groups in society where we don't have the same capacity for oral and written expression. So I find that, I mean, for me, I always try to forget that I speak and hear when I work with children, and I try to be more, just trust more my feelings, my gut sense, my intuition, and my observation around nonverbal cues and whatever form of expression that they can provide us in the interaction. Do you have any experience of this particular way of interacting in your research?
Yes, I have some. I mean, there must be others with much more experience of that in research, since I've only done this one proper piece of research. But with the qualitative interviews with 6 and 7-year-olds, we used pictures. So there were pictures, and then we had general conversations around that, and we had the space to move around. So there was a bit of play going on, some teaching me on the whiteboard. They were my teachers, so they were teaching me about various topics. I had one girl, this was the same week as Michael Jackson died, and she showed me all the moves she knew from Michael Jackson. So we were dancing Michael Jackson in the classroom in between, because I think with children, to get more specific, I think with children, it's important to have breaks from talking about a particular topic. You need to talk about it for a while, and then there will be a little loop of distractions, what we would call distractions, but are important to the child. And so we follow the child's line of thinking and examples, and then we can come back again and we go in circles like that. And I think that has to do with trust as well, building a trusting environment where the child feels that they are heard and that they can talk about what's important to them. So, but that was just part of the conversation. It was a qualitative research where I had to transcribe our interview and thematically analyze and write it up in an academic paper. And so it was very, very traditional and relying on written and verbal communication. And this is what in Children Heard, we want to get away from that a little bit. We want to allow ourselves to be creative. It's not so much about the academic writing and contributing or adding to the body of knowledge as such. It's more about the process of engaging, of hearing, and of constantly creating new opportunities to share and to engage. That's kind of our aim. And I think that allows for more creativity as well. But I hope there are people probably like you, Stefania, and others who are fighting or promoting ways in research that are more inclusive of alternative ways of communicating. I think that's essential to make way for children, whether it is in research or in decision-making processes or in media, that we accept that there are other ways of communicating and expressing themselves. And I think that's the rewarding bit as well, because when we invite children onto the stage or to join us around the table, so to speak, something happens with the table with us because we're having to open up to other ways of communicating, other ways of being. And that's partly the gift that children have to give to the process as well, that they are forcing new ways of thinking in order to be included. Yeah.
To me, it seems that, let's say, working with children in this way really open up many opportunities to rethink research method also for, I would say, any other people, because Stefania was right when she was saying, well, research is in a way is changing, maybe slowly, but it's changing in the sense that there are some efforts in order to be more open to different methods, to different perspectives, and to be inclusive. And I do think that some of the process that we observed, basically working with adults, I mean, starting working in unstructured settings where people can really co-construct and engage in conversation instead of being interviewed like this and this and that. So it really seems to me that this could really open a new approach to research also with adults. And I think that in this sense, this could also be very helpful because we are able to access many different tools. For example, I think about the different social networks that really have in a way less attention to the writing. There are more and more social networks, for example, that use images, and maybe this could be something that also for the research with adults could be really relevant. I think, yeah, really the idea is that we can really learn a lot from children, not only from their voices, but also from the way they in a way force us to adopt a different perspective, also in the way we approach other people, in the way we make questions, in the way we engage into relationships. So I think that this is very, very important in terms of transforming also the practices and the participatory practices that do characterize community psychology work.
Yes, I really love that, because very often the narratives around hearing children is about that it benefits children. You know, it could be about that it improves their self-esteem, it prepares them for democratic participation, it helps them to recognize that they're important, or it helps the caregivers give better care because they hear what the children need. And very rarely do we recognize it. In my experience, the benefits, the gifts that children can also contribute and give by being part of various processes. For instance, I actually brought an example. We can jump a little bit forward here to this picture. When I argue that we hear children because we need to hear them. We need children's voices and we need their participation to be a whole community. And just this pandemic has been such an example of how we needed to mobilize everybody. Children have had to fight against this pandemic alongside their parents and grandparents, and the whole society have had to go shoulder to shoulder. And in Norway, we had 3 press conferences for children throughout the pandemic. Which are press conferences where the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health and Families and Education have come in and answered questions from real children all over the country. And in one press conference I thought was particularly moving was, of course, there were questions about the virus and when it was ending and if summer holiday was going to be ruined, and those questions like the immediacy of the impact on the children's lives. And then there were questions about the Prime Minister, how she was doing, how she was keeping strong. Was it difficult to run the country? And one child said, you know, what can I do what can I do to make a difference or to help? And all of these questions, it just, to me, reminded me of so many things, of the importance of seeing people, you know, behind all that power, there are people, the importance of in the upheaval and change and fear, to ask each other how you are doing, are you okay? This attitude of what can I do, all of those things, the relational nature of their questions and the immediacy. I think all of that was just such an important contribution as well in mobilizing to action and in gathering and bringing together a whole community. And I think we could have press conferences that were open to children. Why not? Why are children not invited to ask questions in all press conferences? Why do we have so many spaces that are inaccessible to children? I think we have already answered some of those. I think some of the assumptions about the validity and value of children's contribution are part of that. But I think certainly it's worth asking these questions and recognizing what children bring to the process, what children bring when they join in and contribute. Yeah. I don't know if there are examples that people have experienced similar things, that when children were invited, something new happens or something important happens to the process.
I can share something. In my school, in my first year working and in this school, and I made a Google form to know what they want to change in the school and what activities and new subjects they really want in the school. And it was really surprising for me, children with 10 years old and 11 years old that talk about life skills like emotional literacy and financial literacy, and these were so powerful and so big, and I was really admired to have little kids talking about this and this need that they have, and in the context they live, this makes perfectly sense. It's a rural setting and some difficulties in terms of money, so for them this is really a need they have, and we didn't think about it. So that's only when we heard them that we think about it. So it was really interesting, and it was shocking for me, this knowledge they already have about it.
That's such a great example. I know sometimes it's so simple, isn't it? We just ask. It's as if, why can't we just remember that? It's so simple, and yet it can mean so much, both in terms of building relationship with the children at that school, in sharing and building that expectations that we're interested in what you have to say, and of course in benefiting from understanding more and having new ideas and new perspectives, and running the school in a better way, because we've heard from children who are actually the beneficiaries of that school. Yeah, I think that's a great example. I mean, we had this Minister of Education, the woman on the left in this picture, had a very interesting, she won a competition after that press conference, which was done in just one single school. I think it was year 6 or 7, by a radio reporter asking who was the best at communicating to children. So there was a bit of a local competition there, and it was interesting to hear the reflections, what was important to them. We were talking about colors, about facial expressions, about the background, about mimics. You know, that was how that was important to them in order to pay attention and listen and hear. And so she won, and the radio reporter called her and told her that you won this prestigious prize from this group of children. And she was delighted, and she was sort of, this is, you know, more important than so many other prizes and recognitions that I've received. And then she said something really interesting. She said, I've never actually heard directly from children, you know, on these matters. And I was thinking, I think that's very common. I don't think politicians making huge decisions for children will have had direct feedback or engagement or a live relationship with children. Just hearing how to communicate is just a very important thing to get feedback from children on when you're in a position of deciding over children. or making decisions on behalf of children. And so I think it was just so, it was just interesting, both hearing what the children were saying and how she received it, because clearly she wanted to hear from children and she loved it, but she just hadn't thought about perhaps asking them. That's what I think might have happened. I'm looking at time. It's 6:10. I would like to make one last point, perhaps, about assumptions of children or the process of hearing children. But what do you think, Stefania?
Yeah, I think the topic of assumptions is very important. And I had a question here that you addressed at many, many levels. But I wonder if we could maybe go over your thoughts about someone like us who want to work with children as a professional, and they've never done that before. What would be some self-reflective work on what areas of themselves, in terms of their assumptions, their intentions, what would you suggest that they do in order to connect with this issue in a way that opens up their ability to really be present and listen to what children have? And also the other greatest challenge I find, which I was hoping you could discuss a little bit, this topic, is what happens next. Like, we listen to them, and then what? And I find that there's often, like you pointed out, there's no continuity. I have an example from the world of climate change and environmental activism. We all know the work that Greta has done in the last couple of years. She's mobilized a massive amount of young people to go in the streets, to be very loud and express themselves. And we have a lot of articulate young people out around the world to say their message. And then there's been a review of what happened as a consequence of those movements. And Greta herself published a piece which was very disheartening because nothing happened. Like, the impact that this movement have had on decision makers has been almost inexistent. But then when you talk to adults, they all look at the young people with that a bit of a condescending attitude. Or it's great that they're participating, it's great that they're active, but then they don't take what they say seriously. So I'd just like to know your thoughts around this topic of listening is the beginning of a process, right? So what do you see the next steps are? And also, just going back to my first question, is what is some of the personal self-reflective work that someone should do when getting into this line of work?
Yeah, so I would want to hear from other people, actually. These are very sort of reflective questions. I could speak for myself, because I've been reading up about some of the literature on listening to children for practitioners in the one-to-one encounters with children, and where they talk, there's some writing about how it demands time. It demands effort, intentional effort. It can be hard work. It's something you learn over time. And I don't agree with that. I think it has to do with a mindset. If you have a mindset that children cannot be trusted, for instance, you feel a bit suspicious when a child is saying whatever the child is saying, you feel a bit suspicious that why are they, for their motivations for saying that, you're already in a mindset of distrusting children. And then it becomes difficult to listen because of your mindset, because you're having to rework the way that you think. And instead of working on your mindset, you are doing it in practice, and that becomes hard work because you're constantly having to stop yourself from making assumptions, for interrupting, for asking what color is this, or what sound does the cow make. Instead of listening, it's difficult to not automatically go into the mode of the adult that is the teacher. And the sort of the one in control. I think that can be hard work, but I think it's the mindset that is the most important place to start. And for me, it was learning play therapy and child-centered play therapy, which asked you to not say anything unless it was reflecting what the child was saying. That was the only thing you can say, or just, in a natural way, engage and respond, but not in any way lead. So that means I sit down for an hour at a time with children aged 3 and upwards, and I reflect what they say. And I think that is a great way of getting into it. Yeah. But other people will have different. What about you? How did you come about learning this?
I think like you, it's you have to have a personal propensity to do it. I think people can learn, but you must have for me, it's a deep desire to be in their world and be part of that world in their own terms. So when I work with young children, and I worked too with the very young, like in the preschool settings, I just, I don't know, I just enter that world and try to leave, or not even try, for me, it's natural to leave everything behind. I'm there in the moment with them. And I think it's because of I don't know, it's just my personal desire to be part of that and to get to know their experiences. But for me, the biggest challenge is to work with the adults that are the support systems around the child. I find a lot of my work is not so much around enabling children to express themselves, but to change the environment so that that expression becomes natural. It's just part of the ecology of the place. So that, for example, give you an example, some of the work I've done with the preschoolers involved getting to understand their point of views about their experience in childcare during the days. And I had to, and I involved, it was a study we did in the city of Ottawa. There were about 12 childcare centers, so a lot of educators involved. And I remember one of the biggest challenges was to change the mentality of the educators that their children couldn't do it. So the educators started off around the project by making comments about, but my children cannot say anything, they will not tell you much. There were strong statements about competence or lack of competence. So throughout the study, what happened is that in the end, we were able to get a lot of insights from the children using arts-based methods of various kinds. And by the end of the process, the biggest change, you could have observed it in the educators, where they were shocked that their children were even able of expressing themselves once you used, the proper approach to listen to them. So that's where my work is. That's what I do mostly in my work. I try to work with the adults and the ecosystems around the children, so that when it's normal, it becomes normal for them to be heard and express themselves.
I would like to jump in here, because I think that it is also something that Stefania mentioned before, and it is about, let's say, the end of the process. I mean, I can hear children, and I can probably also try to mobilize let's say, the community in order to have a different attitude toward children and be confident that children have resources and capacities. Because I think that the experience that Stefania was mentioning of educators and teachers of not being able to see children as they are, but they see through their own lenses, is something that probably starts in preschool and keeps going on, definitely in elementary school, in junior high school, in high school, and I don't know, probably also at the university, but well, we need to reflect on this. But sometimes, especially when you work, maybe not with very, I mean, you also engage with children. You tell them that you want to listen to them because they want, maybe you want maybe to bring about some change regarding their environment, so make, I don't know, their environment more similar to what they want. And I mean, it's really a challenge to be able to bring those changes at the ecosystem level and to influence policies. And sometimes what you have, I mean, I also had some experiences where, let's say, we were engaging with children in order to support the process of empowerment. But at some point of the journey, I was really worried about the fact that the experience was disempowering to them because we were not really able to reach the policymaker, those who were able to support the change that we were willing to bring into their context. So how do you deal with that? I mean, I think that what we did in our experience was that we tried to be very honest with the children we involved, try to clarify the limits of our possibility in a way, but also we were also clarifying that we were trying in a way to do our best to mobilize the community, to find the advocate and allied in our battle. So what is your experience? Do you have some of those frustrating experience or not? I hope you do not have them, but
yes, I have, and I think that goes not, I don't think that's especially true for children. I think that goes for anybody who wants to influence decision-making processes. I think there are so many competing interests and values, and I think that is part of participating, is to know that our voice is just one of many voices, and there are limitations to it, and that a positive result isn't necessary to get one's way, but to be heard and to be part of the process and have been consulted and to have had an impact on the process of decision making. So that is more, I think for me, the challenges have been more that children haven't been asked, or there is more the challenge of thinking that the issue is too complex for children to engage in and understand, and sort of a laziness, I think, on the part of the adults in making it accessible or in trying to build that bridge with children. I think one of the reasons why some decision makers, you can call them that, don't do that as well is because there's perhaps an expectation that when children have said something, it will be mean to not give them what they're asking for, or you will be making a very unpopular decision if children say, we would love for the school to be pink, and you go and say, sorry, we heard you said pink, but we're not going to give you that because we want gray. And that's I don't think child participation means that the children will always get their way, but that they will be part of there has to be a serious effort on the part of the decision makers to include and invite children, and to let that be one of many voices that are being considered in making a decision, and that it shouldn't be necessarily set up as the expectation that that in a participation process children will get what they're asking for, if you know what I mean. But I think we're talking about hearing children at very different levels. So let's see here, we can move on from this boring picture. We got stuck on this very formal picture here. Just to think about, I haven't got the function here to just jump between slides here. So hearing children happens at so many levels, and I think at the level of involvement and participation is slightly different from making sure that there was representation of real childhood experience in media, for instance, or that children are being heard by the important adults in their life, and interpersonal communication between teacher and child and between parent and child. And I think they're all linked together, but I think they're very different processes. So when we talk about hearing children, at least the way of hearing children that I do and focus on is at the interpersonal level and representation in media. So we don't facilitate spaces where children are participating in decision making, for instance. And I work for local government where that could be part of the job, and where we're working towards that. And I feel that decision makers are resisting asking children because there is this unsaid expectation that means that we have to listen to what the children are saying. And I'm kind of saying, no, we need to involve children so that they can be part of the process and it can impact the process rather than, yeah. But that might be slightly different to what you were talking about, perhaps.
No, I think that probably it's not so different. I mean, I think that what you said is very relevant. Involve the people in order to know that they are able to affect the process. It doesn't mean, of course, that you get what they want, but affecting the process, I think, is really an empowerment experience, because you recognize that you have a voice, a place, and that they see you. Because in many cases, children and young people feel that they are not seen at all by adults. And so this, of course, being part of the process makes a big difference in terms of maybe also creating different opportunities in terms of I don't know, formal participation or whatever, but it's really being seen. This is really something very important to be part of the process.
Yeah, I think that makes it more interesting as well for people to engage with children when they become contributors to the process, and not just being asked what they think the solution should be, but they're involved in the actual process. There's a relationship back and forth going between children and decision makers, rather than children being consulted on what the decision should end up with, and that paper of children's views being sent to the decision makers, and they are left with rejecting or accepting that. I think the much more interesting thing to do is to facilitate spaces where there can be interaction and involvement in the process. And I think it changes people's understanding and approach when they engage with children, when they have to convey their message into a language that children can engage with. Even that in itself is changing the process, I think. And I think we need decision makers who have contact with children, who have a sense of have a way of communicating, platforms of communicating with children and in being involved with them, rather than consulting through a report, for instance, alone. Although those have very important contributions and are valid, I think my passion is for facilitating spaces of relationships and interaction. Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know if we should move on to, we haven't actually talked about safeguarding issues, for instance, which is actually one of the big things that come up when we talk about engaging with children. But we don't have to be talking about absolutely everything. We might be onto something a bit interesting here that people want to chip in on.
I'm just cautious of time. We're already at the 1.5 hour mark.
What?
So I don't
Yeah,
know.
we are. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
We
I
should
was
respect that.
wondering if someone from the audience wants to, I don't know, ask questions, make comments, bring some experiences.
Does any of this that we've talked about, is that kind of relevant to your job or your role? Is there something of this that you will be taking away?
Yes, it is an interesting one, and I just have a look on your page, and I was thinking about some children that I know that they are 10 years old, 11 years old, and they have some pictures, drawings, and maybe they can submit to your page in order to, how to say, to expand the message of about the global problems, or taking in consideration their point of view. The children's point of view. And what about the social media? How it was about, no, I don't know if you use or children communicate with Facebook or something like, did you use during this project or not? Something about, as we know that they are, even in this age, it is very, social media, using it by them is a bit very problem sometimes, but we need to find the ways in order not to prohibit it, but also to use it in a good way, and for these problems, maybe to address these issues about this COVID or global.
Yes, absolutely. I'm aware that we're over time a little bit. So Stefania, I trust you will just stop and interrupt. Can I respond to that quickly, or what are we thinking?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. In Norway, we're very strict with time. I'm generalizing, but yeah, that would be my impression. So yes, I love the topic of social media and screen time. So we would love to do a project where children could tell us their thoughts and opinions and experiences with screen time as a concept and of social media. That would be, we are not interacting with children through social media. So far, we're only interacting with children through their parents. And we are interested in creating new and innovative ways of reaching children, of hearing children. And one of them is through interviews that parents do with their children. And then they share the content, the result or the content of that interaction with us. And so, as you can tell, it's slightly different from research, at least in a more traditional sense, that it's actually the parents doing the research. We're not looking at writing reports, but rather in creating resources where more conversation can be had. So, for instance, what you're talking about, social media and screen time, it would be interesting to have resources that parents and teachers can use that were based on children's opinions on the matter and children's experiences on the matter, and that takes the point of view of the child, rather than material being created from an adult's perspective or point of view. And that's kind of what we're looking at. We're wanting to create resources that are grounded in children's own experiences and words.
May Lene, I have a really very short question, but I have to make it to you. From your experience, and I was thinking about this screen time research with parents and children, and I think it could be very, very interesting. Which is the experience of parents? How many things they discover about their children? In the sense, I don't know, do you have some feedback from the parents about this? The impact of being involved in a research and engaging with their children in a way, in a different way from the usual one. I think this is very, very interesting.
It is. You know, maybe I should have a look here. I had a slide, but I don't need to bring it up. I can just look at it here, the slide that I had on children. So we had one of the questions of the interview was to the parents, asking, what was this like? What has this interview been like for you and your child? And some of it, I could read some of the comments from parents, if that would be interesting. Is that what you meant? Yeah. It was hard for him to hear. This is the parent saying, but good for me to hear and understand better his side of things. Homeschooling was hard, but we made it through. And then somebody else saying, it was interesting to get my child's view of what's happening in the world. And another one says, the child liked it. And although we've talked a lot about it together, some of the answers came as a surprise to me. One says, was much calmer over the virus than I thought, did not seem to be more stressed or anxious to answer the questions. So these are just a very few of the comments, but we have lots and lots of comments from parents saying what the interaction was like. And even in the answers of the other questions, there were sometimes glimpses of interaction between parent and child, such as the child jokingly saying that after the coronavirus, they hope the Prime Minister will come to visit, they will make a big amusement park in our neighborhood. They were just joking with the question. And then you see in brackets from the parents laughing out loud. And, you know, you have these interaction between parent and child also through the questions. Or when a child was saying how worried and upset they were, and then the parent in brackets having to say, nothing really bad has happened in our family, so I'm not sure what this is about. And so you have the two of them commenting or talking together about the topic. And I guess we're not looking to try to separate the child's voice from the adult's voice and to just get the child. We're embracing the contextual and relational nature of that information, and actually for that perhaps to be even more natural than trying to separate the child's voice from the parent's voice. Maybe this is, you know, the family dynamics belongs in also in the sort of content and in the process of research that might not be so far from the lived experience of the child, these conversations. Yeah, and also thinking maybe family focus groups. Could we make a game that families can play, which is about exploring some of these topics? I think activism is becoming much more commonplace, that parents want to raise children that are conscious, that are aware of what's going on around them, that want to impact positive change on their environment. And so I think this is becoming more common, and that parents are keen to use perhaps an opportunity like this to expand in a conversation later on. So there might be very interesting ways of doing that as families, rather than trying to just separate the child from their context and trying to get a pure child's voice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Very, very, very interesting stuff. You do amazing work. It's fascinating.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah, I think it's fun and interesting.
Yeah, I do think that this offers very interesting perspective. Also, probably sometimes to rethink the overall work that we do when we engage with any kind of people, with children, with adults, with people that come from specific background, because it really helps us to rethink our perspective. And I think that, well, I am one, I said at the very beginning that not all community psychologists work with children. I am the one of those, because basically I work with adolescents and not very young people. But really, I think that some of the insights that we shared today could be really helpful for the practice that we do in our different contexts. And also, I think just this last point that you were making about considering contexts as they are, as they develop, and trying to engage with those contexts in order to understand what happens there. I think it's very, very important. So I don't know if this may be my closing remarks. If someone wants to add something, we may stay here for no more than 5 minutes. So I don't know if you have any other comment or questions. But I also see that some people are leaving because we are a little bit late on our schedule. So really, from my side, I want to thank you, to thank May Lene, to thank Stefania, to thank all the participants that were very attentive to what was said, what was presented. And I think that we really had the chance to think and probably to go much more into a better understanding of the work that May Lene and also Stefania is doing with children rights. And I think that one of the idea at the beginning was also to maybe have the chance to establish new networks, new collaborations, because this is networks are important in order to support and to advocate for children, and also networks also for innovate research somehow, because it is something that is really needed, and different perspective to be incorporated is something that is important for the work we are doing and the social challenges that we have to deal with. Stefania, do you want to have a final say?
Like I said, I find this work very interesting, and I'm sure that May Lene, you and I might create new opportunities to interact further on this, because I can see lots of synergy in the work you do and the work that I do. And I just want to thank everyone to be here, and Cinta especially for organizing the seminar on this topic. I feel that when we speak about community psychology, first of all, in Canada, it's almost inexistent. There's not such a discipline, believe it or not. And I've been trained in Italy, my psychology degree is from Italy, so I'm familiar with the tradition, but North America, not so much, it's not very present. But just as a side piece of information. But the other thing I wanted to say about community psychology is that my understanding of it is that community is seen as really important for children's well-being, but rarely children are seen as active members of the community that shape the community as well. So by looking at children from this perspective as agents of change, people with capacities, instead of being only looked at vulnerable and in need of protection, really changes the way that we consider the value of involving young children in processes that are relative to community dynamics, community planning, community well-being, and so on. We are such an adult-centric society that everything that's outside of the adult range, meaning children and elderly, are completely marginalized. And then we expect children and elderly to fit into a world that was not created to facilitate them. So I think that the value of using this approach is that to create more balanced communities that fit the needs of multiple ways of seeing the world, and social and physical world, because it's not just about social mechanisms or psychological mechanisms, it's about physical spaces as well. So I'm happy that May Lene had a chance to show you how this is done. It's feasible, it's not as scary as it sounds. It can be really interesting and fun and engaging and enriching, both professionally and personally. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.